Hi guys, my name's Justin Zella, and today I'll be talking about the effects of climate change and the Great Famine in the Middle Ages. First big question. So I threw two topics at you. So, what was the Great Famine? The Great Famine was this period of time during the Middle Ages between the years 1315 and 1317, where mass amounts of starvation occurred, particularly in all of Europe, which led to mass death and disease amongst the people. This also would eventually lead a couple decades later into what would become the Black Plague, which basically eliminated more than half the population of Europe at the time. So this was kind of like a straw that broke the camel's back sort of situation leading up to it. So this period of time was ridiculously devastating to the people, and the majority of the famine was caused by crop failures, and then food prices drove up immensely. So economic disparities were huge amongst the people, and they couldn't afford food, or if they could, they'd just run out of money. So it was just a really, really bad time to be in Europe, unfortunately. But another big question is, why did this even happen in the first place? So what actually caused the Great Famine? Which is a great question, and surprisingly, the answer to that is a more modern issue that we're dealing with now, and that would be climate change. Climate change was the big cause to the Great Famine itself, because during the start of the Middle Ages, the climate transitioned to what we know or call the medieval warm period to what is known as the Little Ice Age. So this caused global temperatures to drop about 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, which doesn't seem significant, but as we'll see from what happened, it definitely was. So this impacted the whole world, but Europe was particularly devastated during this period of time of like transitional climates, and the damage varied in many different ways, but particularly Northern Europe was affected the most significantly out of like all of the regions because the shift in temperature. So what were the consequences of this climate change? Because we're already talking about that now with the Earth heating up, but this is more cooling down. So what would happen if we cooled the Earth a significant amount? So first off, mass flooding occurred. It ruined crop harvesting, which again was a huge cause for the famine. And then along with that, with it being colder, crops died more easily. So getting crops in general was ridiculously hard at this time, and that's probably the biggest reason the famine occurred in the first place. So these extreme winters caused most of northern Europe to have pretty significant issues, ranging in very, very different areas. For example, like boats would be frozen in the middle of the ocean, or so they couldn't fish or get food from the oceans either, which was already a problem because they couldn't get food from the crops. And then glaciers would expand, destroying villages repeatedly, which would kill people because they didn't have housing anymore, etc. So with all that in mind, mass death occurred amongst all the people of Europe from the harsh winters and starvation, and that also included livestock, which further contributed to more death of the people. And then food prices would have skyrocketed, which halted economic growth and leave the people that survived the transition period of this climate pretty devastated, because they were left with no money and starving and basically on the verge of like death's door. So what was the long-lasting impact of these events with this climate change and then the Great Famine? So mainly economic disparity was the big issue. So the rich and the poor gap really, really grew to ridiculous amounts. So the rich continued to indulge in whatever the heck they wanted, and the poor grew much, much more as the middle class became more and more poor, and then they were clumped together because they'd take out loans from the wealthy people and then be in debt to them, so they'd have to live near them to pay off the debts. So that caused a mass amount of clustering, which was really, really bad, because then the plague hit and became much, much more significant because the disease was able to spread so much more easily because they were all clumped together. So it was just very, very, very bad circumstances that led up to the plague, and that was in large part due to the famine itself. So along with that, crime increased drastically at this time because people were forced to do things like steal food from one another, and along with that, they would take a lot of risks to get food or just to survive, which was really, really bad. So they'd eat stuff they shouldn't, which caused further sickness among the people. And then combined with the plague, the Great Famine took the lives of about 60% of the population of Europe. which is obviously one of the most significant periods of history because the mass amount of death that occurred, like, it is beyond ridiculous. So it's obviously very significant that we talk about it and the effects that climate change can have. So it's very, very important we look ahead to the future to try and make sure we can prevent issues like this from happening again. But the Little Ice Age didn't end until the 19th century as well, which forced the whole world to adapt to much colder environments, which therefore forced improvements to technology, particularly agricultural technology, with the mass famine. So it had even more of a long-lasting effect than just the crazy amount of death that happened. So I guess there is some sort of bright side of what happened, as we were able to figure out how to deal with it eventually. So that's why we're here today. Thanks so much for your time. Here are my sources. Yeah.